9 days ago, on May 14, 2026, a peer-reviewed study published in Nature Communications by researchers at University College London confirmed that in March 2022, a body of magma large enough to fill 32,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools ascended silently from more than 20 kilometers beneath São Jorge Island in Portugal's Azores archipelago, traveled the full length of a crustal fault system and stopped just 6 kilometers below the surface, close enough that the island's ground physically rose by 6 centimeters, and then, without warning, without erupting, went quiet. Not gone. Quiet. The system is not inactive. It is accumulating. If you rely on this channel for science that is grounded in verified data and explained with honesty, subscribing ensures that none of this reaches you late. This work depends on the audience that values it. Every figure in this script was drawn from official scientific and governmental sources: USGS, NOAA, the Smithsonian Global Volcanism Program, NASA, Nature Communications, and peer-reviewed research from UCL, the Spanish National Research Council, Cardiff University, and Centro de Informação e Vigilância Volcânica dos Açores, known as CIVISA. But official sources are not infallible, and neither is the human process of reading them before any decision is made, whether personal, professional, or otherwise verify independently through the official channels. The sources are listed, the data is public, the responsibility to check belongs to all of us, but that is not even the complete picture. What the study published 9 days ago actually reveals, and what the data shows when read in full, is not merely a historical account of something that almost happened in 2022. It is a forensic blueprint of how this island's geological system works, how fast magma can move through it, how silently it can do so, and what condition that system is in right now. The UCL research team, led by Dr. Stephen Hicks of UCL Earth Sciences and co-lead Dr. Pablo J. of the Spanish National Research Council in Tenerife, did not study the 2022 São Jorge crisis as a curiosity. They studied it because it changed the fundamental understanding of how magma behaves inside volcanic islands, and because what they found makes the question of what happens next on São Jorge not a remote hypothetical. It is the primary open question in Atlantic volcanology on this date. Here is what the official data actually shows. In March 2022, a seismic swarm began at 16:05 local time on Saturday, March 19th, along a 1 ESE fissure beneath the central northern ridge of São Jorge. Within 48 hours, approximately 1,100 earthquakes had been recorded. Within the first week, that number had exceeded 12,000. By March 24, CIVISA reported more than 2,300 earthquakes, nearly 200 of which had been felt by the island's population. The swarm continued accumulating. By early April, the total count had passed 20,000 individual seismic events. The quakes were clustered in a northwest to southeast elongated zone, 10 to 15 kilometers below the surface, beneath the sector running between the town of Velas and the coastal platform of Fé do Uvidor. 25,000 earthquakes were eventually logged. 255 of them were felt by residents. Now consider what was happening beneath those numbers. The UCL study, using 18,000 earthquakes relocated to high precision using both onshore seismometers and ocean bottom seismometers deployed from the Portuguese Navy's vessels in the Atlantic, combined with GPS and satellite radar measurements, reconstructed the underground movement of that magma in 3 dimensions. What they found was this: the magma did not rise slowly with gradual warning signs, it rose rapidly, it ascended mostly without producing earthquakes during its upward journey. The researchers call this a stealthy intrusion, meaning that much of its ascent from the upper mantle could not be detected in real time by standard seismic monitoring. Most of the 18,000 earthquakes the team analyzed did not occur while the magma was moving. They occurred after it stopped. The earthquakes were the consequence of the stall, not the signal of the ascent. Dr. Hicks stated directly, this was a stealthy intrusion. Magma moved quickly through the crust, but much of its journey was silent, making it difficult to forecast whether an eruption would occur. Read that again with the weight it deserves. A volume of molten rock sufficient to fill 32,000 Olympic swimming pools moved from the upper mantle toward the surface of an inhabited island, and the movement itself was largely silent. The warning system that the population of São Jorge and the civil protection authorities of Portugal depend upon the network of seismometers that registers earthquakes was recording the aftermath of what the magma had already done, not the process of its arrival. Think about what 32,000 Olympic swimming pools actually means. A single Olympic swimming pool holds 5 million liters of water. The volume of magma that moved beneath São Jorge in 2022 represents approximately 80 billion liters of molten rock, that is more than 80 cubic kilometers of liquid stone, under pressure, under temperature, in motion. The Invulcan Institute, the Volcanological Institute of the Canary Islands, estimated the total intrusion at 20 million cubic meters. For comparison, the magma intrusion that immediately preceded the 2021 Cumbre Vieja eruption on La Palma Island in the Canary Islands, the eruption that ran for 85 days, destroyed approximately 3,000 buildings, forced the evacuation of 7,000 people, caused 843 million euros in damage, and buried entire neighborhoods of Las Moncas and Todoque under lava. That initial La Palma intrusion was estimated at only 11 million cubic meters. São Jorge in 2022 hosted nearly twice that volume, and the volcano did not erupt, not because the system was insufficiently charged, but because a fault zone intervened. This is where the UCL study becomes genuinely significant in a way that changes how this island must be understood from this point forward. The magma ascended through the Pico do Carvão Fault Zone, one of São Jorge's major structural fault systems, a zone that has produced powerful earthquakes historically. What the researchers found is that this fault played a dual role. Dr. described it precisely. The fault acted like both a highway and a leak. It helped magma rise, but may also have prevented an eruption. The fault allowed the magma to move upward rapidly, channeling it through pre-existing fractures in the crust. But the fault also allowed gases and fluids under pressure to escape laterally, bleeding off the pressure that would have driven the magma to the surface. The system deflated not because the magma was gone, but because it lost the pressure required to breach the final one. 6 kilometers between where it stopped and the ground above it, and here is where this account becomes genuinely significant. The magma did not leave, it stalled. The study confirms that it remains intruded at shallow crustal depth. Satellite ground deformation data showed the island's surface rising 6 centimeters above the intrusion, 0.6 centimeters, the height of 2 stacked coins, but what moved was not metal and not soil. What lifted was the entire surface geology of a volcanic island, pushed upward by an underground mass of molten rock the size of a small mountain range. The Pico do Carvão Fault Zone may have acted as a pressure release valve in 2022. The question the data cannot currently answer, the question that Dr. Hicks and their international team acknowledge openly, is whether it will do so again. The question is not whether the system beneath São Jorge is active. The question is when. To understand how that question lands with full weight, it is necessary to go backward not to 2022, but to the geological record of São Jorge itself, because this has already happened before, more than once, and the record of it is still preserved in the rock. The Smithsonian Institution's Global Volcanism Program lists 11 confirmed Holocene eruptions for São Jorge. 2 of them, the eruptions of 1580 and 1808, are among the most consequential volcanic events in the history of the Azores archipelago. In the 1580 eruption, magma ascended from at least 23 kilometers below the surface, ponded at a depth of approximately 16 kilometers, and then erupted along 3 lava fissures, the Ribeira da Almeida, the Quaimada, and the sector between Ribeiro do Nabo and the coastal beach of Cruzes. 10 people were killed. The island's communities were devastated. And then, over the following 228 years, that ponded residual magma sat in the crust, cooling and chemically fractionating, differentiating into more volatile, more gas-rich compositions until it erupted again. On the morning of May 1, 1808, the Manadas fissural volcanic system reactivated along the ridge southwest of Pico do Pedro. Suffocating gases, sulfuric acid, chloric acid, and carboxylic acid vapors poured from the vents. 8 large earthquakes accompanied the eruption. At least 8 people were killed in Ursulina, where the lava consumed the town. Historical records account for approximately 45 total casualties across both the 1580 and 1808 events, making them the second and third deadliest volcanic events in the entire history of the Azores, behind only the 1630 subplinian eruption at Furnace Volcano on São Miguel, which killed 200 people. The magma that erupted in 1808 was the direct chemical descendant of the magma that intruded in 1580. It had been sitting in the crust for 228 years. What the UCL study confirmed 9 days ago is that in 2022, a new body of magma intruded into that same system, rising from more than 20 kilometers below, stalling 6 kilometers from the surface and inflating the island's ground by 6 centimeters. The 1580 eruption was preceded by a seismic swarm. The 1808 eruption was preceded by seismic activity beginning in 1963 that led to submarine eruptions in early 1964. The 2022 crisis was preceded by a sudden, largely silent magmatic ascent that produced 25,000 earthquakes only after the magma had already stopped moving. Every eruption this island has ever produced began with a system that was accumulating. Now consider the people living inside this system. São Jorge Island is 55 kilometers long and no more than 8 kilometers wide at its broadest point. Its population is approximately 8,500 people. They live in the elongated towns and coastal settlements that line the ridge velas in the southwest, Calheta in the east, and the scattered fays, the coastal platforms of collapsed lava cliffs that dot the island's shoreline. These fays, Fay dos Cubras, Fay do Uvidor, Fay de Santo Cristo, are some of the most geologically distinctive human habitats on Earth. They are built on ancient lava flows that tumbled from the island's steep cliffs into the sea and solidified, creating flat platforms just meters above the Atlantic. The people who live on these platforms grow grapes, keep cattle, and fish from traditional wooden boats. The fays have no roads connecting them to the main island ridge. Some are accessible only by sea or by steep footpaths. And the sector directly above the 2022 magma intrusion, the area identified by Civisa as the zone of anomalous seismic clustering, runs precisely through the northwest to southeast corridor that sits above the communities of Velas and Fay do Uvidor. If you were standing in the town of Velas today, if you were watching the Atlantic from the harbor wall where fishing boats tie up each morning, drinking coffee, listening to the wind, you would have no direct sensory evidence of what is 6 kilometers beneath the ground under your feet. You would not feel the intruded magma. You would not hear it. the seismic activity has subsided to near background levels. Civisa lowered the alert level to V3 in June 2022 following the decrease in earthquake frequency. The monitoring is in place and detection is possible, but prediction is not. That is the honest statement the official science supports. What the people of Velas would ask, if they had full access to the data published 9 days ago in Nature Communications, is the same question every volcanologist in this field is now obligated to carry. If 32,000 Olympic pools of magma reached 6 kilometers from our surface and the primary warning signal, the earthquake swarm, only appeared after the magma had already stalled, what is the warning sign for the next movement? The answer, as of May 22, 2026, is that researchers do not yet have a definitive one. What the UCL study provides is the forensic architecture of how the last event unfolded. It does not provide the predictive model for the next. Dr. Ricardo Ramalho of Cardiff University, a co-author of the Nature Communications study, stated that the research supported local authorities in assessing a potential volcanic threat and highlighted the value of combining onshore and offshore geophysical data for accurate detection and localization of seismic events and ground deformation. That combination land-based seismometers and ocean bottom sensors working in parallel is now the scientific recommendation for ongoing monitoring. Before 2022, São Jorge had only 3 permanent seismic stations. The emergency deployment during the crisis brought 15 additional short-period stations within 4 days of the swarm's onset. Whether those additional sensors remain in place, whether the ocean bottom seismometers that proved essential in tracking the magma's lateral movement at depth are still deployed, is now a question of institutional will and funding, and here is where the connected systems must be understood, because São Jorge does not exist in geological isolation. The island sits at the convergence point of one of the most tectonically complex environments on Earth. The Azores archipelago occupies the Azores triple junction, the intersection of the North American plate, the Eurasian plate, and the African plate, where the Mid-Atlantic ridge spreads northward and the Terceira rift extends eastward. The spreading rate along the Mid-Atlantic ridge near the Azores decreases from 22.9 millimeters per year at 40 degrees north latitude to 19.8 millimeters per year at 38 degrees north, and this variation itself signals the presence of what geologists classify as the Azores microplate, a crustal block caught between 3 major plates and exhibiting its own complex kinematic behavior. São Jorge sits directly on the Terceira rift, an oblique tectonic structure spreading at approximately 4 millimeters per year. The Pico fracture zone, one of the primary submarine fracture systems of the archipelago, runs just south of São Jorge, and the submarine fractures between São Jorge and Pico Island have historically generated some of the largest damaging earthquakes in the region. In 1757, an earthquake entered near Fados Vimes on São Jorge killed approximately 20% of the population of Manadis, roughly 1,000 people in a single event. In 1980, a magnitude 7. 2 earthquakes struck the Central Azores group, causing widespread destruction across Terceira, São Jorge, and Graciosa. This is not a dormant corner of the planet. This is a place where 3 tectonic plates are actively separating at measurable rates, where a hotspot plume feeds heat from the deep mantle into the base of the crust, and where the faults that run through this specific island have now been confirmed in a peer-reviewed study published 9 days ago to be the exact pathways through which magma traveled during the most recent volcanic crisis. The Pico do Carvão Fault Zone did not form in 2022. It has been accumulating displacement and stress over geological timescales. The magma that used it as a highway in 2022 intruded into a pre-existing structural weakness. That weakness has not been healed. Faults do not close after magma intrudes them. In many cases, intrusion widens them, the second connected system. That demands attention is the ocean itself. São Jorge's phase are coastal structures built from ancient lava flows. They sit at sea level. The island's steep volcanic flanks, some rising more than a kilometer above the Atlantic and near vertical walls, are the accumulated product of eruption cycles extending back through the Holocene and beyond. Flank instability is a known hazard on all oceanic volcanic islands, and the 2022 Civisa Risk Assessment specifically identified the danger of landslides potentiated by seismic activity. A large-scale flank collapse on São Jorge, the kind of gravitational failure that has reshaped the island multiple times in its geological history, leaving the ancient Faye platforms as its visible evidence, would generate a tsunami propagating across the North Atlantic. This is not speculation. This is documented in the geological record. The question is not whether slope failure is possible on São Jorge. The question is what combination of seismic stress and magmatic inflation would be sufficient to trigger it, and whether the current monitoring configuration would provide advance warning measured in minutes or in seconds. Minutes are not hours, and in this context, that difference is everything. There is a broader pattern here. That the long-view science demands be stated plainly. The 2021 La Palma eruption, the event that destroyed 3,000 buildings, poured lava into the sea for 85 days, and altered the geography of a Spanish island in ways that will be visible for centuries, began with an initial magma intrusion estimated at 11 million cubic meters, the São Jorge 2022. Intrusion was estimated at 20 million cubic meters. The eruption threshold that La Palma crossed the pressure differential between stalled magma and ruptured crust was crossed with roughly half the volume that São Jorge accumulated. The Pico do Carvão Fault Zone released pressure in 2022 in a way that La Palma's Cumbre Vieja did not, but the UCL study zone framing of that difference is cautionary, not reassuring. The fault acted as both a highway and a leak. The word the researchers chose, leak, is not the language of a permanent seal. It is the language of a valve, and valves, under sufficient pressure, fail. Professor Ana Ferreira of UCL earthSciences, a co-author of the Nature Communications study, noted that the 2022 response required urgent NERC funding to access geophysical equipment, alongside additional support from Portugal, Spain, and the European Research Council, in what she called a clear example of transnational cooperation between academic and civil institutions. The word urgent carries weight here. It means the scientific infrastructure to respond to a rapidly evolving volcanic crisis was not pre-positioned on São Jorge. It had to be mobilized after the swarm began. It arrived 4 days after the crisis onset. The magma, by the time those additional sensors were in place, had already completed. Most of its ascent, it had already stalled. The instruments that ultimately allowed researchers to reconstruct the event were deployed to study an intrusion that had, in terms of its primary upward movement, already concluded. What the data from that deployment now provides: the 18,000 precisely relocated earthquakes, the satellite deformation maps, the ocean bottom seismometer records, is a baseline. A fingerprint of what this specific volcanic system looks like when it mobilizes. The Pico do Carvão Fault Zone is now mapped in 3 dimensions as a magma pathway. The depth and geometry of the 2022 intrusion are documented. The 6-centimeter ground uplift above the stalled magma body has been measured. These are the reference conditions. If ground deformation returns to this area, if Civisa's monitoring network begins recording uplift in the same NWSE corridor between Velas and Fay do Ouvidor, scientists will now have something they did not have before the Nature Communications study was published, a verified model of what it looks like when this system is loading. But the honest acknowledgement that the science requires and that the people of São Jorge deserve to hear is that the study also confirmed something more difficult. Much of the 2022 magma ascent was seismically invisible during its occurrence. The standard seismic monitoring network that existed before the Crisis 3 stations would have detected the earthquake swarm that followed the stall. It would not have detected the ascent itself in real time. The additional network deployed during the crisis improved detection enormously. Whether São Jorge now carries that enhanced monitoring capacity permanently is a question the official scientific record does not yet clearly answer. There are approximately 8,500 people on this island. They wake each morning inside a volcanic system that the most current peer-reviewed science confirms intruded 20 million cubic meters of magma into its shallow crust 4 years ago, lifted the ground surface by 6 centimeters, and then went quiet at 1.6 kilometers depth. They tend their cattle on the high ridge pastures. They harvest grapes on the Fays. Their children attend school in Velas. The fishing boats leave the harbor before dawn. They do not need to be alarmed in a way that serves no practical purpose, but they and the civil protection authorities of the Azores regional government and Portugal need the monitoring infrastructure that the science now says is necessary, pre-positioned, permanent, with ocean bottom seismometers as a standard component, not an emergency deployment. Because the next time this system begins to move, if the pattern of the 2022 intrusion holds, the window between the first detectable seismic signal and the moment of potential eruption may be measured not in weeks but in days. The geological record of São Jorge does not suggest this island is finished with volcanic activity. 11 confirmed Holocene eruptions, the most recent in 1808. A failed eruption confirmed, peer-reviewed, documented in Nature Communications in 2022, a magma body that reached 1.6 kilometers from the surface and then stalled, a fault zone that acted as a pressure valve once. The spreading plates beneath this island are still moving at their measured rates, the Azores. Microplate is still accumulating strain at the triple junction. The hotspot plume that has been feeding heat and mantle material into the base of this archipelago for millions of years has not diminished. The conditions that produced every previous eruption on São Jorge, the tectonic extension, the crustal faults, the deep magma source, the pathway to the surface are all present, unchanged, still operating on geological timescales that make the 4 years since 2022 an imperceptible interval. What the official data actually shows, as of May 22, 2026, is that a body of magma nearly twice the size of the La Palma pre-eruption intrusion sits intruded in the shallow crust of an inhabited Portuguese island, that the fault system which temporarily prevented eruption in 2022 has been confirmed as a structural magma pathway by peer-reviewed science published 9 days ago, and that the seismic monitoring infrastructure to detect the next movement of that system was, as recently as 2022, insufficient to track the magma's ascent in real time. This is not a hypothesis. This is documented in the geological record, in the satellite deformation data, in 18,000 precisely relocated earthquakes analyzed by an international team of geophysicists and published in one of the world's most rigorously reviewed scientific journals. The system is not inactive, it is accumulating. And the most honest sentence that the science supports the sentence that Dr. Hicks and Dr. and their colleagues carefully chose not to speak aloud, but embedded in every figure of their study, is that the rock beneath São Jorge is not waiting for permission, it is waiting for pressure.